The Spanish Congress has voted against the Catalan separatists' amnesty bill that would have benefited those who took part in the 2017 failed illegal secession bid.
Northern Ireland's Unionist Party has agreed to restore the region's government after a near 2-year boycott.
After months of fighting, Russian troops have reached the heavily damaged eastern Ukrainian town of Avdiivka, the gateway to the Russian-controlled city of Donetsk.
A controversial amnesty law that would have benefited Catalan separatists has been blocked by the Spanish Congress. The bill was rejected by one of the two Catalan parties, the Junts or Together, who wanted to ensure that their leader, Carles Puigdemont, could return home from Belgium, where he's a fugitive. They argued that the proposed law did not give him enough protection. The Conservative People's Party and the far-right Vox also voted against it, meaning the bill received 171 votes, 5 short of the majority it needed. The bill must now go back to a parliamentary commission to be drawn up again within 2 weeks. Socialist Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez had agreed to push through the law in exchange for parliamentary support from two small Catalan separatist parties. This enabled him to form a new minority leftist government late last year.
2 years after walking out of the Stormont Parliament in Belfast, the pro-British DUP have decided to return. At issue for the past 2 years has been the notional trade border in the Irish Sea as part of the Brexit Windsor framework. The DUP say it isolated Northern Ireland from GB, but now say 2 years on they have persuaded the British government and the EU to drop the notional border. However, the real story arising from the change of heart from the DUP is that the pro-British party has agreed to enter a parliament where Sinn Féin Vice President Michelle O'Neill will become the first ever Irish nationalist to head up the Northern Ireland regional government.
This is the first time ever that Sinn Féin has come in as a nationalist party. It's the largest party in Northern Ireland, and it's a big shock for many unionists, including for many in the DUP.
The elevation of Catholic Michelle O'Neill to the role of First Minister gives Irish nationalism in Northern Ireland the dominant political position. On the streets of Belfast, the proposed resumption of the Parliament has been welcomed.
I think she'd be very capable, but we need all our politicians working for us.
We're now seeing more Catholics than Protestants. Finally, there's that shift has happened. That might mean a nationalist First Minister. It might mean 10, 15 years' time, we'll be looking at a referendum the same way that Scotland has.
However, some British unionists say Michelle O'Neill and Sinn Féin are being rewarded for bombing their way to the negotiating table.
Well, in the morals of Northern Ireland, it's an horrendous shift, because this is a lady who tells us that there's no alternative to mass murder, no alternative to the incineration of people in hotels, no alternative to atrocities like Enniskillen on Remembrance Day, like King's Mills, where Protestants were taken off a bus and done to death because they were Protestants.
The future of the Stormont Parliament here in Belfast now falls on Brussels and London to make the appropriate amendments to the Windsor Framework document, with Sinn Féin set to occupy the First Minister seat for the very first time in its history. Expect calls to grow louder for a unification of Ireland referendum in the coming years. This is Ken Murray for Euronews, Belfast, Northern Ireland.
After months of fighting, Russian troops have reached the heavily damaged eastern Ukrainian town of Avdiivka. Avdiivka is a gateway to the Russian-controlled city of Donetsk. All attempts by Russian troops to advance there have failed until now. Civilians left have been fleeing the town as Ukrainian forces try to repel the attacks. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron is visiting Sweden for a roundtable discussion on the future of European security.
The cost, the real cost, on the short to long run of a Russian victory is too high for all of us. This is why the reasonable answer is to put ourselves in a situation to support Ukraine during this year and the years to come. Whatever it takes, whatever it costs.
Meanwhile, Switzerland has sent 9 Leopard 2 battle tanks to Germany. Under the agreement, Germany cannot transfer the tanks to Ukraine, but dismantled parts from the tanks will be used by the German army's active fleet. The Swiss defence minister has said by sending the tanks, Switzerland is doing its part for the security of Europe.
At least 11 people were killed, including 4 children, when an Israeli strike hit a residential building in central Gaza on Tuesday, according to reporters who saw the bodies at a local hospital. The strikes came as the Israeli army continued to expand its assault on the southern half of the war-stricken territory, with a focus on the city of Khan Yunis. A truck carrying around 80 bodies was sent to a cemetery in Rafah on Tuesday, where they were later buried. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres held a meeting on Tuesday with representatives of donor countries at the UN headquarters in New York to discuss the fallout from accusations that 12 employees of the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees were involved in the October 7th attack by Hamas.
It is very critical that we recognize the central role that UNRWA plays in the Gaza Strip. There's an ongoing discussion, I think, and donor countries, of course, have set their parameters and also have given clarity. It's an ongoing discussion. There's no substitution for the humanitarian role that is played in Gaza.
On Tuesday, the Israeli army released footage of battles with Palestinian militants in Khan Yunis, saying that their forces eliminated terrorist operatives, conducted target raids on terrorist infrastructure, and located large quantities of weapons. The heavy rain over the past days in Gaza City has made conditions for displaced people sheltering in makeshift camps even more desperate. Since the war began, 85% of the region's population has been displaced.
The use of facial recognition could increase, despite European efforts to regulate it. Last December, the EU closed an initial agreement on artificial intelligence that would limit its uses to very specific contexts and under judicial authorization. Specific contexts could include a terrorist attack or searches for missing people. But for some, the loopholes are still there.
They've brought in some really broad conditions within which police can use these systems. And so what we fear is that this will have a legitimizing effect. These systems that so far we've been able to contest and say, we don't want these in a democratic society, it will become harder to push back. And we might see other countries around the world saying, well, the EU has rubber-stamped these technologies.
While the European Parliament wanted a ban, countries like France have pushed for a series of exceptions that would allow a more extensive use of facial recognition technology. France even announced the use of AI to control suspicious activity during the Olympic Games. Digital rights organisations have said the new European legislation does not rule out massive surveillance.
What we can expect is potentially an increase in the use of facial recognition systems in our public spaces, especially when these systems are used live. So the idea that as you are walking around a public space, going to the shops, going to school, to the doctors, to a demonstration, that there might actually be increased powers for law enforcement agencies to be using this live facial recognition technology to track you across time and place wherever you're going.
But some MEPs say the proposed law strikes a good balance between security and civil rights.
I think is a very good way that we can balance the integrity but also safety. And if we would have banned this technique, then two things would happen. First, the societies, why should the integrity of a terrorist is more important than the security of our citizens? And secondly, this technique would continue to be developed by other countries, and especially by China.
This Friday, the EU countries will vote on the final version of the law. Some of them are still undecided. If it falls, the EU will have to restart the negotiation of the AI Act.
Members of a rock band that has been critical of Moscow's war in Ukraine remains locked up Tuesday in a Thai immigration prison. On Sunday, the group explained that its members were detained for bureaucratic formalities relating to a concert in Phuket, which was solved after a fine was paid due to the band openly criticizing the Russian invasion of Ukraine. If they are sent to Russia, they risk imprisonment. Russia's ambassador to Thailand said Russian diplomats were not responsible for the group's detention. Twin sisters who were stolen and sold at birth to different families have been reunited 19 years later. The girls found each other thanks to a TV talent show and a TikTok video. Neither Amy nor Anno knew they were adopted until they found out they were identical twins. The case of Amy and Anno brings to light the thousands of children who were illegally taken from their birth parents in maternity wards and sold to different families from the 1950s until 2005 in Georgia.
Seville's official Holy Week poster is causing controversy. The poster is supposed to depict the resurrected Christ, but opinions are divided over whether the image is beautiful or inappropriate. Spanish painter Salustiano Garcia, who chose his son as the model, dismissed the criticism as unfounded. On the streets of Seville, opinions are divided.
No me gusta. Y ni me siento representada, ni mucho menos, ni eso representa a Sevilla, ni qué va, es otra cosa.
Nosotros estamos acostumbrados a otro tipo de carteles y nos ha cogido un poquito de sorpresa, pero ni lo veo bien ni lo veo mal. Veo una cosa novedosa y que no estamos acostumbrados y que estamos acostumbrados a otro tipo de carteles en la Semana Santa de Sevilla.
The eye-catching image has drawn lots of attention, going viral on social media upon its release.